So what is Daniel chapter 5 talking about? Daniel chapter 5 is talking about when Babylon was surrounded by the armies of the Medes and the Persians. But even in that situation, the king at the time, who was Belshazzar, very similar to Daniel's Babylonian name, which was Belteshazzar. But Belshazzar actually, it says, made a great feast. That's in verse 1 of chapter 5. To 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. And then he commanded for the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem, for those to be brought, so that they could his princes and his wives and his concubines might drink from them. So just to summarize, what happened is that when they were drinking, bearing in mind that I already said that the Babylon, the walls of Babylon were actually surrounded by the armies of the Medes and the Persians. Here was this king and his princes and his concubines drinking, because basically the belief was that no one could get through the walls of Babylon and conquer Babylon. So not only was he drinking, but he was commanded that those vessels, the golden and silver vessels that had been taken from Jerusalem, should be brought out so that they could drink from them. And whilst they were drinking, there was this hand that appeared and started writing. In the King James Version, it says the plaster, but it's basically plaster. Started writing on the plaster. And the king became very afraid. And it says, verse 6, then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. There are some who say that that's actually a way of saying that he wet himself, basically, because he was so scared. And just like his father or grandfather before him, when he obviously couldn't read what the writing was, he called once again the magicians, the sorcerers, the wise men, the soothsayers, to come and tell him what the writing was and to interpret it for him. He was repeating the same mistakes that had been made by Nebuchadnezzar before him, and when all of them failed, basically, to tell him what the writing was that was on the wall that had been written by this mysterious hand, and his wife came and told him that there was a man called Daniel, whose Babylonian name was Belteshazzar, who had the gift of interpreting dreams and all this stuff. So Daniel was called, and when he came, he was told that if he could read the writing that had been written by this mysterious hand, you'll be greatly rewarded. And Daniel said to the king, keep your gifts to yourself, but I'll read the writing for you, and I'll give you the interpretation anyway. So Daniel basically he kind of rebuked King Belshazzar and said that that Nebuchadnezzar, the king before you, had also been a very proud king and had refused to humble himself when he should have really acknowledged that God was overall in control and removed kings and placed whatever kings he wanted on the throne. But you have not humbled yourself, even though you knew that your father. Some say that Nebuchadnezzar was not really Belshazzar's father, but grandfather. Regardless, but you knew that this happened to Nebuchadnezzar in the past, but you refused to humble yourself, and that when Nebuchadnezzar's heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men. This is verse 20 and 21. And his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. Daniel was talking here about how Nebuchadnezzar had basically gone a bit mad and started living like an animal, was eating grass, and had the hairs on his body became like the eagle's feathers, and his nails like the talons of a bird. And basically was saying that even though Belshazzar knew all this, he had refused to humble himself, but had actually um, lifted himself up against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before thee. And thou and thy lords, thy wives and thy concubines have drunk wine in them, and thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know, and the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. You didn't glorify God, but you are worshipping these things that are made of wood and stone and gold and brass and iron. Um, then Daniel went on to explain to Belshazzar that that's why the hand was sent that wrote this writing, and this is the writing. This is verse 25, and this is the writing that was written: Mene mene tekel ufasin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mene means God has numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Verse 26. Tekel, thou art. So let me read that again. Thou art weighed in the balance and art found wanting. Verse 28, Perez means thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. It says, Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet and put a chain of gold about his neck and made a proclamation concerning him, that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. In that night was Belshazzar the king of the Chaldeans slain, and Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So Darius, who was the king of the Medes and the Persians, became the new king. When he says 62 years old, is 60. A score is 20, okay? So 60 is 60, plus 2 is 62. So Darius was 62 years old when he became king. So that's pretty much what chapter 5 is talking about. But I just wanted to explain, in case some of you are wondering, how did the Medes and the Persians manage to get inside the walls of Babylon? Well, there was a river that flowed through Babylon. It actually went under the walls. But where the river went under the wall in Babylon, there were gates. Okay, and those gates, there are some historians who say that those gates were not shut, actually. At that very time when Belshazzar was having his feast and he was drinking with his princes and his concubines, and using the vessels of gold and silver that had been taken from Jerusalem, the 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 armies of the Medes and the Persians managed to divert the river that went under the walls of Babylon, and they basically walked through under the wall, through the gates that some say were actually not shut. They actually went into Babylon under the wall through the path that was supposed to be taken by the river, which they had diverted. So that's how Babylon was conquered. So now we move from, remember, from chapter 1 to chapter 5, we read about, we're reading about Babylon, and one of the main characters is Nebuchadnezzar, who refused to humble himself until basically God showed him that he was in control, and caused Nebuchadnezzar to have the mind of an animal, and he was driven from those that the men in Babylon drove him out from his own palace and from his own position as king, and he went and lived like an animal for 7 years, eating grass, and having the dew on him, and having the hairs like an eagle, like I already said. So now we're moving to a different chapter in, so to speak, in the book of Daniel, where we have the kingdom that was prophesied to take over after Babylon was Medo-Persia. They're actually like two nations in one. The Medes and the Persians were basically one nation. So that's why when we get to Daniel chapter 7, in the next two chapters, where I'm going to try and I'm going to basically explain how God uses what's called repeat and enlarge. It's a teaching process that's called repeat and enlarge, where in Daniel chapter 2 we kind of like have a basic prophecy of those major kingdoms that were to come upon the earth. The first one being Babylon, and the next one being Medo-Persia, and then Greece and pagan Rome, and then pagan Rome changed and became paper Rome. So now we see now the Babylon is going out of the picture, and then we have the Medes and the Persians coming in, and yeah. So I was about to start mentioning a bit more about Daniel chapter 7, but I will explain all that when I get to that. Okay. So this is what Daniel chapter 5 is talking about. Is basically the end of the Babylonian Empire, and Daniel continues to live and is actually given a position when the Medes and the Persians take over. Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to mention that there are some phrases or very wise sayings that we have in English, that are actually taken from the Holy Scriptures. For instance, here in Daniel chapter 5, where we have this hand that wrote on the wall. In English, they have this expression, he saw the writing on the wall, or she saw the writing on the wall. That's where that's taken from. It's taken from Daniel chapter 5. Okay, I just thought, I meant to mention that in the video, but earlier, but kind of like forgot. But I just thought that was very interesting and something to mention before ending the video.